It began, like most hauntings, with something that wasn't supposed to be there. In the fall of 1963, Ed and Lorraine Warren, America's most recognized demonologists, were investigating a small rectory on the outskirts of Connecticut. The building was old, far older than the nearby town that had grown around it. Its paint had peeled away like old parchment, and its corridors whispered with drafts that felt too deliberate, too focused. Lorraine described the place as heavy, as if the walls themselves remembered things they shouldn't. That night, Ed carried his camera, a Rolleiflex he used to document their early cases. Lorraine, ever sensitive to the unseen, had been uneasy from the moment they crossed the threshold. The air felt charged, restless. She claimed something had been watching them since the garden. They began taking photographs: doorways, empty pews, a cracked crucifix hanging upside down. The sound of the camera's shutter broke the silence, echoing faintly in the hall. They saw nothing unusual. But when Ed developed the photos later that night in their basement darkroom, one image stood out. It showed them standing together, hands slightly clasped, gazing into the lens. And there, between them, in the narrow space of shadow that should have been empty, was another figure. A woman, pale, faintly smiling. At first, Ed thought it was a trick of exposure, a double image, maybe Lorraine's reflection caught in motion. But when he held the photograph closer under the dim red light, the details made his stomach twist. The woman's features didn't match Lorraine's. Her hair was wrong, stringy, wet-looking, and her dress was decades out of style. It wasn't a modern distortion. It was something older, deliberate. Lorraine entered the room and froze when she saw the print. She didn't speak. She simply touched the photograph with trembling fingers and whispered, "That's her." When Ed asked what she meant, Lorraine said she had seen that face before, during their séance at the rectory just hours earlier. The same faint smile had appeared in the darkness when she closed her eyes to pray. She thought it was her imagination, the afterimage of candlelight. But now, in black and white, the proof stared back at them. The woman's faint outline wasn't static. If one looked long enough, her head seemed slightly turned toward Ed, her smile widening just a fraction too much. That single photo, Lorraine later said, was the beginning of everything that came after. The Warrens couldn't ignore what the photograph revealed. Lorraine insisted the woman was tied to the house, anchored there, as she called it. According to the local parish, the rectory had once belonged to a reclusive priest in the late 1800s named Father Matheson, who lived alone after being accused of heresy. He was said to have conducted private ceremonies at night, often involving a single parishioner, a woman named Abigail Trent. When she died suddenly in 1889, the priest locked himself inside the rectory and was never seen again. The townsfolk whispered that her body was buried beneath the church floor. Ed and Lorraine returned to the site the next evening, this time with new film and a tape recorder. The air grew colder the deeper they went inside. Lorraine later recounted hearing faint sobbing echo from the stairwell, though Ed heard nothing. They followed it to the altar room, where an antique mirror leaned against the wall. "Take a picture of that," Lorraine said softly. Ed clicked the shutter, once, twice, and the mirror vibrated faintly, as if something behind the glass exhaled. When the photograph developed, the same figure appeared again, but this time she wasn't standing between them. She was standing behind Lorraine, her translucent hand resting gently on Lorraine's shoulder. That image marked the moment the Warrens' investigation turned personal. Lorraine began waking in the night, convinced she heard someone whispering her name. The whispers grew into dreams. Abigail's face, pale and dripping with candle wax, appearing in the dark corners of her mind. Ed tried to dismiss it as exhaustion, the toll of constant exposure to grief and fear. But then, one morning, he found new photographs hanging in their darkroom that neither of them remembered taking. They were pictures of the rectory again, but these were wrong. The angles were off, the lighting impossible. And in each one, the figure of the woman was closer, clearer, her smile now visible even in shadow. One photo even showed the Warrens asleep in their own bed, the faint silhouette of Abigail standing between them. That was when Ed realized The entity wasn't trapped in the rectory anymore. The photograph had carried her home. The first sign that the curse had followed them came in something almost ordinary: the darkroom lights flickering on their own. Ed kept meticulous notes, and he recorded the dates. Each incident happening exactly at 3:08 a.m., the same hour the rectory's clocks had stopped on the night of their investigation. Lorraine tried to continue her psychic readings, but the moment she closed her eyes, she saw flashes, camera shutters, streaks of light, and that same faint smile forming in the black void. She claimed it wasn't just a haunting anymore. It was an attachment. The spirit had latched onto the image, using every photograph as a doorway. When Ed developed another batch of negatives, he noticed that every single one had changed. Pictures of his clients, family, even landscapes, all corrupted. In every frame, faint streaks of light spiraled into the shape of a woman. Sometimes she appeared only as a mist. Other times, her face seemed pressed against the lens, her eyes hollow but knowing. "She's learning," Lorraine whispered one night as she stared at the photos spread across their kitchen table. "She's trying to come through." But it wasn't just the photographs. Lorraine began to feel cold hands brushing her shoulders, even when she was alone. The scent of decayed roses filled the air, the same scent from the rectory's altar. It lingered for hours, long after Ed had burned the negatives. Desperate to contain whatever had been unleashed, Ed sealed the remaining photos inside a blessed lockbox. He called a priest they trusted, Father Gordon, to bless the home. But the moment holy water touched the box, the air inside the room shifted. It grew heavy, suffocating. The walls groaned like wood under pressure, and every light in the house burst out at once. From the darkness came a single sound, the faint click of a camera shutter. When light returned, the box lay open on the floor. Inside, the photographs were gone. In their place was a single fresh print, newly developed, though no one had taken it. It showed Lorraine kneeling at the foot of their bed, her face hidden in her hands. Standing behind her was the faint, smiling shape of the woman, her hand reaching for Lorraine's hair. That night, Lorraine refused to sleep. She sat by the window until dawn, clutching a rosary and whispering prayers she barely remembered. When Ed asked what she saw out there, she simply said, "She's not in the photos anymore, Ed. She's in the reflection." Lorraine first noticed the distortion in their bathroom mirror one early morning. The glass shimmered faintly as if coated with dew, yet the room was dry. When she leaned closer, she realized her reflection wasn't mimicking her perfectly. It was smiling back half a second too late. The expression on the mirrored face wasn't quite hers. The corners of the mouth were sharper, the eyes darker, as if something inside the glass was learning to mimic humanity. She blinked, and the grin vanished, leaving only her trembling face staring back. Later that day, Ed reviewed a stack of case photographs for an upcoming lecture. As he flipped through, his breath caught. In 3 separate photos, taken in 3 different homes, Lorraine appeared faintly in the background, though she hadn't been there for any of them. Her figure was pale, almost translucent, standing in corners or behind subjects, always with the same crooked smile. He rushed to show her, but Lorraine turned away before he could finish. "That's not me, Ed," she whispered. "That's her, wearing me." Night after night, the manifestations escalated. Lorraine began hearing faint whispers during her prayers, each one echoing her own voice, but speaking in reverse. Doors creaked open by themselves, not violently, but as if politely, the way a guest might enter uninvited. The scent of decayed roses grew stronger, lingering around mirrors and picture frames. Even their family dog refused to enter the study where the photographs were kept, growling at unseen corners. By the 3rd week, the haunting had seeped into every reflective surface. Lorraine covered every mirror in the house with black cloth, but Ed found her one night, standing in front of the covered glass, whispering to it. She said the woman in the reflection was promising her peace, that she could stop seeing the dead if she just let her in. Terrified, Ed pulled her away, but as he did, the cloth slipped off the mirror. For a split second, 2 Lorraines stared back, one pale, smiling, eyes too bright to be human. Panicked, Ed contacted a photographer friend to test the theory that the entity was using light to manifest. They set up a camera facing the covered mirror and fired a flashbulb. When the photo developed, it didn't show the mirror or the room. Only Lorraine standing in a field of darkness, her reflection smiling behind her, closer than before. The Warrens decided to seal the mirror, locking it inside their occult collection with a prayer of binding. Yet, even after it was gone, every photograph of Lorraine taken afterward seemed just slightly off. In some, her smile lingered longer than the shutter allowed. In others, her eyes didn't catch the light. And in one, faintly visible if you looked close enough, the third figure stood behind her again, still smiling. The breakthrough came by accident, as most horrors do. Ed had been studying the negatives from their earliest investigations: rural homes, crumbling churches, graveyards swallowed by fog, when one particular image caught his attention. It was an unused roll from 1963, shot the same night the cursed photograph had been taken. Most frames were dark or overexposed, but one showed the rectory hallway at a strange angle. In the far corner, barely visible in the silver grains of film, was the same faint woman's shape. Only this time, her face was clear enough to see. Eyes hollow but sharp, lips stretched into a knowing grin. He enlarged the image under red light, and when her features came into focus, his breath stopped. Lorraine entered the room quietly, drawn by his silence. "Do you see her?" Ed asked. Lorraine's expression faltered. "I've seen her before," she whispered. "In my dreams." She described a woman standing at the edge of her bed every night. Long, stringy hair covering part of her face, the rest burned beyond recognition. She never spoke, but the air around her would freeze, and the smell of sulfur would fill the room. Ed scoured local records and church archives for any mention of a woman connected to the rectory. Eventually, he found it. A brief obituary from 1928. Mary Ellen Duval, found deceased in the rectory attic after accusations of witchcraft. The article was yellowed, barely legible, but it mentioned something else. Her body was never claimed. The Warrens returned to the site in the winter of 1964, armed with new equipment: blessed candles, a crucifix, and a reel-to-reel recorder. The rectory was a skeleton of its former self, its roof sagging, windows sealed by frost. As they stepped inside, the air thickened, the silence palpable. Lorraine's breath came in shallow gasps. She could feel something watching. They set the recorder near the altar and began their seance. Lorraine called out softly, asking the spirit to reveal itself. The temperature dropped instantly, and Ed's flashlight flickered. The tape hissed, then a woman's voice bled through, faint but distinct. "Do you still see me?" Lorraine's head snapped up, eyes wide. "Ed," she whispered, "she's behind you." The photograph camera flashed on its own. When Ed developed the photo later, the image showed the two of them kneeling, the faint silhouette of a woman directly between them. Only this time, she wasn't smiling. Her mouth was wide open, as if screaming. The distortion around her face suggested motion, but the camera had been still. The haunting had changed. It wasn't about being seen anymore. Now, it was about being remembered. After that night, Lorraine began to notice her reflection behaving strangely. In mirrors, in window glass, even in the gleam of her teacup, she'd catch fleeting glimpses of the same burned woman's face overlapping her own. At first, she dismissed it as exhaustion. But one morning, as sunlight crept into their Connecticut home, she walked past a mirror in the hallway and froze. The reflection wasn't mimicking her. It was smiling, that same knowing, warped grin from the cursed photograph. Lorraine's knees went weak. She covered the mirror with a cloth, whispering prayers until her voice trembled. Ed found her that afternoon, pale and shaking. "She's with me," Lorraine whispered. "Not at the rectory anymore." That night, Ed placed a crucifix above their bed and burned sage throughout the house. But the scent of sulfur returned, stronger, sweeter, more deliberate. Around 3 a.m., Lorraine woke up gasping, her nightgown damp with blood. 3 long scratches trailed down her arm, raw and burning. Ed switched on the light, and on the wall beside her, written in soot, were two words: still see. It was no longer just a haunting, it was a pursuit. The entity had crossed the threshold between investigation and obsession. Lorraine began sketching the woman's face in her notebook. Almost involuntarily, dozens of drawings, each one more detailed than the last. The more she drew, the stronger the connection became. She couldn't stop. Ed sought the help of a priest they trusted, Father Gordon, who agreed to bless the house and examine the photograph himself. When the priest lifted it from its envelope, his face drained of color. "This isn't just a spirit," he murmured. "This is something that wants permanence. It's using the image as a vessel." Lorraine felt her chest tighten. "You mean she's trapped in the photograph?" The priest hesitated. "No," he said quietly. "You are." That night, during prayer, the house shook violently. Every mirror cracked in unison, releasing a sharp, metallic echo. Lorraine screamed as the photo on the nightstand ignited, the face of the woman flickering like fire. Ed tried to douse it, but the flames wouldn't consume the paper. They only burned around the edges, framing the image like a portal. The following morning, the photograph was cool to the touch again, intact, but altered. The woman was gone. In her place, faintly visible in the dark center of the image, was a different figure, Lorraine, standing alone in the rectory, eyes wide, mouth open in silence. Ed couldn't shake what he'd seen. Lorraine's image, trapped in a photo she hadn't posed for, haunted his waking thoughts. Determined to understand, he began researching the rectory's history. What he uncovered chilled him. The rectory had been the site of a failed exorcism in 1893, nearly 70 years before they ever set foot inside. The priest leading that ritual had died mid-prayer, reportedly burned from the inside. His final words captured in the parish records: "She is inside the image now." Ed scoured every archive, searching for photographs from the old church. One finally surfaced, brittle, sepia, faded by time. It showed a congregation lined up before the altar. In the back row, a shadowy shape lingered between two parishioners, the same woman. Her head tilted, her smile unchanged, her gaze forever fixed on the lens. He placed it beside their 1963 photo, aligning the edges perfectly. The proportions, the spacing, even the warped lighting, identical. That's when he realized the horrifying truth. The cursed photograph hadn't simply captured the entity, it had recreated it. Each time someone took a photo in that building, she returned. The woman wasn't haunting them by chance. She had been summoned through the camera. A repeating echo, an image that never stopped watching. Lorraine's health began to deteriorate as Ed delved deeper. She would wake in the middle of the night gasping, claiming she could hear the click of a camera shutter in the dark. Sometimes, the flash would follow, a blinding burst of white light from nowhere, leaving the smell of burned film in the air. Desperate, Ed visited a local photographer who specialized in restoring old negatives. When the man examined the rectory photo, he frowned. "This isn't standard exposure," he said slowly. "There are two sources of light here. One is natural. The other," he paused, squinting. "The other's coming from inside the lens." That evening, as Ed drove home, his headlights flickered. In his rearview mirror, a figure sat in the back seat, faint, translucent, and smiling. The moment he turned, it vanished, leaving behind a faint handprint on the fogged glass. He finally understood. This wasn't about the rectory. It wasn't about the cursed photo anymore. The entity wasn't bound to the building or even to the image. It was bound to them. And every flash of light only made her stronger. By early autumn of 1964, Lorraine's dreams had turned into something else entirely. She no longer saw the woman in her sleep. She heard her. A whisper that began behind her, always in the same tone. "Do you remember me?" The voice came with the faint echo of a camera shutter, the metallic click, the flash, and then silence. Her skin would feel cold, her breath visible even in a warm room. Ed knew he couldn't ignore it anymore. They decided to conduct a seance, not to summon the spirit, but to release it. The location, their basement, where the cursed photograph was sealed inside a wooden box lined with salt and silver thread. The air down there was heavy, the kind that pressed on the lungs. Lorraine gathered trusted mediums, while Ed prepared his camera to document every step. Though deep down, he feared doing so would only feed it. As the candles flickered, the group began the invocation, asking the spirit to show its face and tell its name. For a moment, the silence stretched. Then the flame bent sideways, not extinguished, but pulled, as though something inhaled deeply from another world. Lorraine's eyes rolled back, her voice lowering to a tone no one recognized. "She remembers," she said, smiling faintly. "She never left the frame." The box began to vibrate. One of the mediums screamed as the air filled with the sound of 1,000 shutters snapping at once. Mechanical, rhythmic, suffocating. The photograph inside began to glow faintly from within, the white of the paper searing through the wood like embers under glass. Ed reached for it, but Lorraine's hand shot out, clutching his wrist with inhuman strength. "Don't," she hissed. "She wants you to." Suddenly, the lights burst, glass rained down, and the temperature dropped so low that their breath hung like smoke. The room pulsed with light, faintly at first, then in blinding flashes. In each burst, Ed saw her, the woman from the photo, closer every time. Her translucent figure forming out of the darkness, her grin stretching wider, eyes gleaming like wet ink. When the final flash faded, Lorraine collapsed. The photograph lay on the floor, the image now burned blank. No figure, no trace of the Warrens, just a smear of black where the faces had once been. Ed lifted it, trembling. The photo had been erased, but in the reflection of the silver frame behind it, she was still smiling. After the séance, the Warren household fell eerily silent. Lorraine recovered slowly, though she described feeling as if a camera lens was always turned toward her, even in empty rooms. Ed, though outwardly calm, could no longer sleep near the basement. The once burned photograph, now just a pale blur, had been locked inside a lead-lined chest, sealed with holy water. But still flashes of light appeared in corners when no bulbs were on. A faint smell of sulfur would waft through their home every night at 3:03 a.m., the exact time the séance ended. Determined to end it, Ed brought the chest to Father Connolly, a local priest and old confidant. Connolly agreed to perform a blessing and examine the photograph. The moment the priest touched the chest, however, he froze. His eyes flicked up toward Ed, uneasy. "It's not the object that's cursed," he said slowly. "It's what was reflected in it." When they opened the box, the photograph appeared perfectly blank, but under the faint glow of candlelight, Lorraine's face emerged on the paper, faintly distorted, her expression twisted into something she never remembered making. Father Connolly ordered that it be burned. The flames devoured the paper easily, but the fire hissed, producing a whisper that every person in the room heard. Still watching. When the ashes cooled, they noticed the faint imprint of a woman's smile branded into the bottom of the silver tray, as though it had been pressed there from the inside. Later that week, as Ed developed photos from another, unrelated investigation, he froze mid-step. On the far left edge of one image, a perfectly normal picture of a farmhouse interior, was a translucent woman standing just beyond a curtain. Her face was smudged, as if smeared by a fingertip, but that same impossible grin lingered. The same tilt of the head, the same hollow eyes. He showed Lorraine the print, and she nearly fainted. "That's her," she whispered. "She's moving through the photographs." It was as if the entity had abandoned the original image and spread itself like rot, imprinting pieces of its presence wherever the Warrens' lenses captured a glimpse of darkness. In the following months, they began finding her more frequently. Sometimes just a blur, sometimes a shadow with the outline of a smile. Cameras would jam whenever Lorraine entered an old building. Shutter clicks echoed faintly in empty hallways. They tried prayer, they tried salt, they even stopped photographing for a while, but it didn't matter. Wherever there was a reflection, a flash, or a shadow, she appeared. And one night, as Ed sat in his study developing a photo, he realized the most horrifying thing yet. The newest picture wasn't of a haunted house or a client. It was of him and Lorraine, taken from behind, and neither of them remembered taking it. Ed's hands trembled as he stared at the photo that shouldn't exist. The angle, the lighting, it looked as if it were taken by someone standing right behind them, in their own home. Lorraine, drawn by his silence, peered over his shoulder. Her breath caught. In the photo, behind them, barely visible in the grainy shadows, was the faint outline of her. The same smiling woman from the rectory photograph, standing just a step closer than before. Her hand, faint and transparent, seemed to rest on Lorraine's shoulder. For a moment, Lorraine felt pressure there, as if cold fingers were actually touching her skin. Panicked, Ed scoured their archives, searching through every photo, every investigation file. There had to be a clue, some forgotten detail. When he found the original case notes from the abandoned rectory, he realized something chilling. The house had once belonged to a woman named Margaret Hensley, a midwife accused of witchcraft in the 1920s. Locals claimed she used mirrors to trap the souls of stillborn children, claiming she could give them eternal rest by reflecting their faces into silvered glass. When the townspeople discovered what she'd done, they burned the rectory to the ground with her inside. Yet, legend said her spirit lingered, unable to pass on, bound forever to images and reflections. Determined to verify the connection, the Warrens traveled back to the ruins of the rectory. The road was overgrown, the structure a charred skeleton, but something about the air felt heavy, static, as if the very atmosphere was charged with memory. Lorraine stood silently before a fragment of wall, her eyes unfocused. "She's here," she whispered, but not in the house. Inside the ruins, they found fragments of scorched mirror glass, still faintly reflective. Ed carefully placed one shard under a flashlight, and for an instant, it caught an image, a woman's face, smiling faintly from the other side of the glass. Then, the light flickered and died. The camera around Ed's neck clicked once on its own. Later, when he developed the photo, his heart sank. The reflection in the mirror shard wasn't just Margaret's, it was Lorraine's, but with Margaret's smile. The entity wasn't haunting them anymore, it was merging. Lorraine woke the next morning to find smudged fingerprints on her mirror, though no one else had touched it. And when she looked closer, her reflection blinked, a fraction of a second too late. Lorraine's dreams became the first to betray her. Every night, she found herself standing in front of a mirror that wasn't her own, an old, cracked frame sitting in a smoke-stained room, the reflection flickering like candlelight. Behind her in the glass stood the woman, Margaret Hensley. She didn't move or speak. She just smiled, that same eerie smile frozen across her translucent face. But each night, she appeared closer. Lorraine would wake gasping, her pulse racing, the echo of whispered words lingering in her mind, words she couldn't understand, but that felt ancient and angry. Ed watched helplessly as his wife grew paler by the day. Lorraine's sensitivity to the supernatural was what made her such a powerful medium, but it also made her vulnerable. When she began sketching things in her sleep, a burned house, a mirror, a face half hers and half another's, Ed knew this was no simple attachment. It was a melding. One evening, Ed set up his tape recorder beside their bed, desperate for proof. The next morning, when he replayed the tape, he didn't hear snoring or whispers. He heard two women breathing, in perfect sync. Lorraine's reflection no longer mirrored her perfectly. Sometimes her lips didn't move when she spoke. Sometimes her eyes seemed a shade darker in the glass. It was as if the mirror world was falling slightly out of rhythm with reality, one reflection at a time. Ed contacted Father Gordon, an old friend of the Warrens who had assisted in past exorcisms. When he arrived, the house felt heavy, the kind of air that hums in your chest before a storm. Gordon walked straight to the mirror in their living room, murmuring Latin prayers under his breath. As he sprinkled holy water, the droplets hissed, evaporating into steam the instant they touched the glass. Lorraine winced, clutching her head. "She's angry," she whispered, voice trembling. The mirror rippled. Slowly, fog began to spread across its surface, like frost forming on cold glass. Then, a hand pressed against it, small, white, and feminine. The outline of a face emerged beneath the surface, smiling that same, impossible smile. The reflection of Gordon in the mirror turned to face Margaret, though the real priest hadn't moved. "You shouldn't have come," the mirrored version said in his voice. The lights flickered, and the mirror cracked straight down the center. When the lights steadied again, Gordon's crucifix had blackened, scorched from within. Lorraine had collapsed on the floor, whispering, "She wants to live again." Ed knelt beside her, realizing with dawning horror that Margaret's curse wasn't just a haunting. It was a possession trying to finish what death couldn't. The next morning, Ed awoke to find the photograph they had locked away lying on their nightstand. The glass was cool to the touch, yet the air around it felt fever-hot. The image had changed again. The woman, Margaret, no longer stood between them. Instead, she now had her hands resting gently on each of their shoulders, her head tilted slightly, as if she belonged there all along. Lorraine felt her chest tighten. "She's trying to replace us," she whispered, her voice cracking. They immediately set up their old camera again, hoping to capture any movement. The lens focused on the mirror while Lorraine held the photograph under the flickering light. Ed clicked the shutter 1, 2, 3 times, each flash illuminating the room for a heartbeat. When the film developed, their blood ran cold. The first photo showed the two of them, terrified but normal. The second, faint fog behind them. The third, only Margaret. The mirror behind her was now gone, replaced by darkness that seemed to swallow her whole. That night, the ticking of their wall clock stopped. Time itself seemed to slow, every sound muffled. Lorraine felt pulled toward the photograph, as if something behind the glass whispered her name again and again, urging her to step closer. She wanted to fight it. She truly did. But her reflection moved first, smiling back even as she stood perfectly still. Ed, desperate, tore through their files, searching for any object that had once held a spirit. Dolls, mirrors, paintings. All of them, he realized, shared one trait. Each had captured emotion. Fear, grief, obsession, the perfect vessels for something waiting beyond the veil. The photograph wasn't just cursed, it was a bridge. And Margaret was trying to cross. Lorraine's eyes grew glassy as she whispered, "She's already halfway here." Then, as if obeying an unseen command, she walked toward the photo. Ed called her name, but her voice came out of her reflection instead. "Ed, please, don't stop me." The Lorraine in the mirror pressed her hand against the glass, and so did the real one, fingers aligning perfectly. The glass quivered. Panicked, Ed grabbed a Bible and began reciting the binding prayer of Saint Cyprian, the one they reserved for the darkest entities. The photograph trembled violently, the figure of Margaret screaming silently from within the frame. The glass shattered, scattering across the floor like ice. The room fell silent, but in the shards that littered the carpet, every reflection showed Margaret's face, smiling back. By the following morning, Lorraine could no longer stand near any reflective surface. Mirrors, glass cabinets, even the faint sheen of a puddle. Every reflection showed her, the smiling silhouette of Margaret between them. The shattered photograph was now locked inside a lead-lined case in their study, yet the feeling of being watched hadn't faded. Ed reached out to their trusted contact, Father Thomas O'Reilly, a priest they'd worked with on prior exorcisms. His voice on the phone was grave. "If the image has become a vessel, Edward, she's no longer confined to the paper. You've given her an opening." That evening, Father Thomas arrived at their home. He refused to touch the case. "I've seen cursed icons before," he said quietly, studying it from a distance. "But this is different. A photograph captures more than an image. It captures presence. You must understand, once something like this takes shape, it cannot simply be destroyed. It has to be bound." He removed a small brass crucifix and began sprinkling holy water over the case. Lorraine flinched at the sound. For each drop that touched the glass, a faint whisper rose from within, like steam escaping a kettle. Then came a low hum, not from the room, but from the house itself. The crucifix grew cold in the priest's hand. Ed's breath clouded in front of him, even though the fireplace roared behind them. Lorraine clutched Ed's arm. "She's here," she whispered, eyes wide. The candles flickered and the photograph case shook violently. rattling like something trapped inside was clawing to get out. Father Thomas began the prayer of deliverance, his voice rising over the sound of cracking glass. The case split down its side, a hairline fracture spreading like lightning. The photograph inside pulsed with light, not warm, but sterile and sharp, like the flash of a camera in a dark room. Lorraine screamed as her reflection in the nearby window turned to face her independently, mouthing words she couldn't hear. "Close it," Ed yelled, pushing the priest back. He grabbed a sheet of cloth, wrapping it around the case, and forced it into their old relic trunk. The whispers stopped instantly, replaced by a deep, echoing silence. But in that silence, Lorraine began to sob. "It's not over," she said. "She's not in there anymore." The priest looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Lorraine trembled, her voice barely a whisper. "I saw her move before the light went out." She was walking toward the window, and in the glass pane beside them, faint but unmistakable, was the reflection of a woman standing outside in the snow, pale, translucent, and smiling directly at them through the frost-covered glass. For days after the ritual, Ed and Lorraine tried to return to their work, but something had shifted, something small at first. Their camera equipment began to malfunction. Film reels would come back overexposed or fogged, and photographs developed with faint streaks that resembled fingers. Lorraine, sleepless and pale, started noticing her own shadow acting strangely in the morning light, lagging just a fraction of a second behind her movements. She would wake to the sound of shutters clicking in the darkness, though their cameras were locked away. On the fifth day, Ed developed a set of film rolls from a client's farmhouse case. Every frame was black, except one. In the faint gray blur of exposure, a figure stood between the couple and the photograph. A woman, smiling. Ed froze. The setting was different, but the outline was the same. He checked the next roll. Again, another family, another case, another photograph with that same ghostly silhouette. It wasn't just following them anymore. It was appearing through their work. Lorraine stood in their darkroom, her breath visible in the cold, chemical air. "She's imprinting herself," she murmured. "Every time we take a photo, she uses the light, like a doorway." Ed stared down at the photographs, his hands trembling. "Then how do we stop her?" Lorraine didn't answer. In the silence, the sound of a single shutter echoed again, even though neither of them had touched the camera. That night, Lorraine burned every roll of undeveloped film in the house. The flames crackled in the fireplace, giving off an acrid, chemical smell. But when the smoke cleared, Ed noticed something horrifying. The flames had not burned black, but white, glowing like magnesium. And in the smoke above the hearth, a shape began to take form, the faint image of a woman's face. Lorraine screamed and stumbled backward. The face was faint but unmistakable, suspended in the curling smoke. Her lips curved upward, not in anger, but in amusement, a knowing, mocking grin. "She doesn't want the photos destroyed," Lorraine whispered, clutching her cross. "She is the photos." The camera on the table clicked once more, unprompted. When Ed developed the accidental exposure later, it wasn't of the room or the smoke. It was a close-up portrait of Lorraine, fast asleep, her eyes open just slightly. And standing over her shoulder in perfect focus was the smiling woman, her hand gently resting on Lorraine's hair. By dawn, Lorraine knew what they had to do. The entity had attached itself not through words or ritual, but through imagery, through the very act of being seen. If they were to break its hold, they would need to confront it where it first appeared, the abandoned rectory where the original photograph had been taken. The old building stood miles outside Brookfield, half collapsed, its roof sagging like the spine of a dying creature. The path leading to it was overgrown and quiet, yet Lorraine swore she could hear whispers carried by the wind. Faint, indistinct voices calling her name. Ed loaded his camera with one final roll of film, determined to capture whatever remained. He didn't believe they could destroy it, but maybe they could contain it, document it for proof. Lorraine's rosary swung gently around her wrist as they entered the ruin. The air was heavy and wet, thick with the scent of rot and old candle wax. Every footstep echoed too long, like the house was breathing around them. "Do you remember where we stood?" Lorraine asked softly. Ed nodded. The light through the broken window was faint, but the frame, that same cracked window pane, was still there. He set up the tripod exactly as before. Lorraine positioned herself beside him, her heart pounding in her throat. If she shows herself again, Ed said quietly, we end it here. He pressed the shutter. The flash burst white. For a second, everything went silent, until a woman's voice, faint and tender, whispered behind them, you already did. Lorraine spun around, her lantern trembling in her hand. The air shimmered near the far wall, as if something unseen had disturbed the dust. Slowly, a figure began to materialize, pale, translucent, wearing a long 19th-century dress. Her face was unmistakable, the same as the one from the photograph. But now she looked sad, her smile gone. You shouldn't have come back, she murmured. You opened the gate again. Ed tried to speak, but the camera began clicking on its own, rapid and uncontrollable. The flash strobed wildly, illuminating fragments of the ghost's face. Then Lorraine's, then the crumbling wall, faster and faster until the room was nothing but pulsing light. And in that rhythmic flicker, Lorraine saw flashes of other faces, dozens of them, trapped, layered behind the woman like reflections in glass. Each one was a soul the entity had taken, captured not by possession, but by exposure. The woman was not just a ghost. She was a collection, a living archive of everyone who had ever looked into her photograph. And now, with each flash, Lorraine felt her body growing colder, her reflection beginning to fade in the broken mirror beside her. The camera finally stopped. Smoke curled from the flashbulb as if something inside it had burned away. Lorraine gasped, gripping her chest. She felt as though part of her soul had been pulled outward, stretched thin into the air. The woman stood between her and Ed now, not entirely solid, but almost. Lorraine's breath caught. For the first time, she could see the woman's eyes, deep, infinite, and reflecting scenes that weren't the rectory at all, but something older, centuries older. Who are you? Lorraine whispered. The woman tilted her head. I was seen before I was saved, she said softly. A camera took me when I was still alive, and that picture, it never stopped taking. Ed stepped forward, his crucifix raised. You were bound to the lens? The figure nodded slowly, her form flickering. They thought they could capture the dead. But every photograph is a door, and when it opens, someone must stay behind to hold it. Her hand rose, translucent and trembling, pointing toward the camera still smoking on the tripod. You opened another. Lorraine's stomach dropped. Every picture they'd taken since that day, every photo they'd used in their investigations, could be another window, another open gate. A lifetime of images, each one whispering in the dark. The woman's voice grew deeper, layered, as though others were speaking through her. I was the first to be seen by their kind, the ones who hunt light. They live inside your lenses now, feeding on what the flash reveals. Ed's hand shook. Then how do we close it? The spirit's eyes locked on Lorraine's. You don't. You can only choose who gets left behind. Before either of them could react, the woman reached for Lorraine. A freezing wind tore through the room, shattering the glass panes and scattering shards across the floor. The camera burst open, its film unraveling midair like a black ribbon. And within that film, Lorraine saw faces. Countless human faces, screaming silently, pressed into the celluloid. She tried to look away, but it was too late. Her reflection in the cracked window no longer moved with her. It smiled faintly, the same eerie smile from the original cursed photograph. And Ed, trembling, realized with dawning horror that Lorraine wasn't standing next to him anymore. Ed Warren stumbled backward, gasping for breath as the air in the rectory thickened with frost. His voice cracked as he called out, "Lorraine!" The only response was the faint clicking of the camera shutter, still somehow functioning, still taking pictures without film. Each click echoed like a heartbeat, mechanical and mocking. The light it emitted was no longer white. It pulsed with a dull crimson hue, like blood behind a thin layer of glass. When the last flash went off, the room fell silent. The camera finally toppled, smoke curling up from its shattered lens. Ed reached out to touch it, his fingers trembling, and froze. Beneath the cracked glass, he saw something impossible. There, inside the viewfinder, Lorraine was staring back at him. Not the Lorraine who stood beside him minutes ago, but a reflection, pale, motionless, her eyes unblinking. "Ed," her voice whispered faintly from within the glass. "You took my place." The temperature dropped again. His breath came out in clouds as he realized what she meant. She hadn't vanished. She had been trapped. Just as the spirit said, someone had to hold the door open. Lorraine's image blinked once, then her lips parted. "Don't let them take another." Ed's eyes darted toward the photographs scattered across the floor, dozens of images from their previous investigations. Each one seemed to move, faintly writhing, as if something alive was trapped beneath the glossy surface. A sound rose from the darkness, a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the walls. The rectory began to creak and groan as if it were alive, breathing with the rhythm of the unseen. Ed tried to destroy the camera, but the moment he lifted it, a voice, deep and layered with dozens of others, whispered from its cracked lens. "She's ours now, Ed." He stumbled backward, shaking his head, gripping his rosary until his knuckles turned white. "No, I'll bring her back." But the camera flashed one final time, blinding him. When his vision cleared, the room was empty, the tripod gone, the photographs vanished, and only a faint outline of soot on the wall where Lorraine had once stood. He fell to his knees, realizing the truth. The entity hadn't followed them. It had chosen them. That night, Ed left the rectory, clutching the burned film canister to his chest. When he developed it weeks later, the image nearly drove him mad. There he was, standing alone in that same room. And between his outstretched hands was the faint shape of Lorraine, smiling. That same unnatural, knowing smile. The photograph now rests, locked away in the Warren Museum, sealed behind blessed glass. Visitors who look at it too long claim to see something shift, a flicker of light, a whisper of motion, and, if you listen closely, a woman's voice faintly asking, "Will you take my picture next?" Years later, after Ed's passing and the closure of the Warren Occult Museum to the public, rumors began to circulate among paranormal researchers. Whispers spoke of a sealed envelope buried deep in the archive, one that contained the original negative of the cursed photograph. The label read only, "Do not develop." Most dismissed it as myth, another exaggerated tale born from the Warrens' legacy. But in 2004, a young photography student named Daniel Croft, obsessed with the Warren case files, claimed to have found it. He described the envelope as unnaturally cold, even in a climate-controlled room. When he placed it under light, the faint outline of 3 figures shimmered through the paper: Ed, Lorraine, and the woman between them. Against every warning, he took it to his darkroom, convinced he'd unveil a piece of forgotten history. But as the image began to form in the chemical bath, Daniel froze. The water rippled, even though there was no draft, and the faint sound of a woman humming filled the room. He stepped back, eyes wide. The photograph now revealed 4 figures. The 4th stood directly behind Daniel's reflection in the darkroom mirror. He turned, nothing. When he looked back, droplets of water on the photo spelled a single word: smile. By morning, Daniel was gone. The lab assistant who found his workspace said the chemicals had boiled dry, as if exposed to extreme heat, yet the air was freezing. All that remained was the photograph, warped and burned at the edges. It showed the same image Ed Warren had described decades ago, the smiling woman between the couple. Only now, Lorraine's figure was gone, replaced by Daniel's face, pale and still. Authorities dismissed the event as an accident, but within the paranormal community, the story spread like wildfire. The Warren file containing the cursed photograph was resealed and blessed again by a priest, its contents marked with a new warning: the photograph expands. Researchers claim that every time it was viewed or copied, another faint silhouette appeared, as if the curse sought new witnesses, new vessels. Today, the negative remains hidden, reportedly encased in a mirrored lead box at an undisclosed facility. Those who've seen even digital scans of the image report strange phenomena, static in their recordings, phantom whispers in playback, and, most disturbingly, faint smiles appearing in the dark behind their reflections. Because the entity that haunted Ed and Lorraine never wanted to be forgotten. It only ever wanted to be seen. Over time, the cursed photograph became something of a whispered warning in the paranormal community, a story that only the bravest or most foolish dared to revisit. As technology evolved, so did the curse. Digital scans of the original photo began surfacing on obscure forums and collector websites. Each time someone uploaded the image, something would change, sometimes imperceptibly at first. A blur in the background, a faint smile where none existed before. Then, inevitably, the uploader would vanish, their accounts deleted, their email addresses bouncing back into digital silence. In 2011, a well-known YouTube investigator named Miles Breen posted a debunking video. He showed side-by-side comparisons of the Warren photo and claimed it was nothing more than a double exposure. He laughed, mocking the fear around it, until his viewers noticed something he hadn't. In the reflection behind him, faintly visible in his monitor's glare, was the same smiling woman. That video has since disappeared, but not before racking up over 2 million views. And within 3 days, Breen's channel went dark. His final post was a single sentence in the comments: "She's in the pixels." After that, paranormal archivists began refusing to share or discuss the photograph publicly. Even major collectors of haunted artifacts kept their distance. The few researchers who still dared to study the phenomenon agreed on one thing. The curse didn't just attach itself to film, it adapted. It traveled through the medium of observation itself. The more people looked, the stronger it became. One anonymous forum user, claiming to be a former assistant at the Warren Museum, explained it this way: "It's not a photo anymore. It's a mirror. Every time someone views it, it looks back and decides who it wants next." From that point onward, the story of the Warrens' cursed photograph stopped being treated like a relic of the past. It became a digital haunting, the first known case of a spirit migrating from film to code. Lorraine Warren had once warned in an interview, "Evil adapts. It doesn't fade. It finds new ways to be seen." And now, with every repost, every grainy reproduction, the smiling woman continues her work, spreading her image one curious viewer at a time. In the winter of 2023, nearly 6 decades after the Warrens first captured that fateful image, a small paranormal group in Massachusetts decided to live stream from the same abandoned rectory where the photograph was taken. They called it Revisiting the Curse. The team brought modern equipment, thermal cameras, EMF meters, drones, and one digital print of the Warren photograph, sealed in a glass frame. As the stream began, over 30,000 viewers tuned in, the chat scrolling with messages daring them to show the woman. The host, a skeptic named Eli Turner, laughed as he unveiled the photograph, placing it beneath a flickering bulb. For hours, nothing happened. Static whispers bled into their microphones, but nothing conclusive. Then, near midnight, the temperature dropped sharply. Eli pointed his camera toward the photo to show the condensation forming on the glass, but the stream glitched. When it returned, the live feed briefly froze on a single, impossible frame. 3 figures standing together. Eli on the left, his co-host on the right, and between them, faintly glowing, the same smiling woman from 1963. Viewers began spamming the chat. "Who's that in the middle?" Seconds later, the entire feed went black. The account was deleted before sunrise. No one ever found the group again. Local police discovered their van outside the rectory gates, doors open, cameras smashed, and the photograph missing from its frame. Weeks later, a small photo lab in Boston reported something strange. An unmarked envelope had been dropped off at their counter, containing a single roll of black and white film. When developed, every frame was overexposed, except one. In that lone image, the same woman stood in the center of a decaying church aisle, her translucent hand reaching toward the camera. And at her feet, a modern DSLR with the lens cracked, its reflection showing 2 terrified faces staring back. To this day, No one knows who developed that film or how it reached the lab, but the technician who processed it refused to take payment. He simply packed up his tools, left his job, and vanished without a trace. The photograph now circulates online under many names: the Warren curse, the third figure, the woman between. But no matter what they call it, one thing remains the same. Each time someone looks long enough into the smiling face at the center, something looks back.